Good afternoon, members of Parliament, support staff, visitors in the Public Tribune, and those following by various forms of media. Welcome to the Central Committee meeting number 22 of today, Thursday, August 17th, 2023. I would like to give a special welcome to Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs, Ms. Sylvia Jacobs, and her support staff. Also would like to give a welcome to MP Py22-23, who actually is with us in the Tribune. Thank you for being here. We've established a quorum of 9 members, 10 members. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I've received notice of absence from the members Bijlani, who is out for medical reasons, as well as William Marlin, who is out for medical reasons, and MP Angelique Rameau, and notice of lateness of MP Brownbill. Are there any other notifications? I see no need. For this meeting, members of Parliament, we have as agenda points: 1, update by the Prime Minister on government's electoral reform trajectory as per the Prime Minister's letter dated March 15th, 2023. This is IS 584, and there was also a related request, IS 759, dated May 10th, 2023. And secondly, approval, composition of delegation, and provisions to attend the celebration of Bonaire Day on September the 6th, 2023. This is IS 1006, dated August 16, 2023. Agenda point 1 was requested by the MPs Wescot-Williams, Heyliger-Marten, and Duncan. We go over to agenda point 1. On March 15, 2023, Parliament received from the Prime Minister the answers to questions sent in writing by MP Sarah Wescot-Williams regarding electoral reform. This document is registered as incoming document IS 584 and can be found on the Parliament General Team, retired P drive. Subsequently, Parliament received a letter from members of Parliament Wescot-Williams, Heyliger-Marten, and Duncan with a request that a Central Committee of Parliament be convened to discuss the above agenda point. The presence of the Prime Minister was also requested, hence today's meeting. I would like first to give the opportunity for one of the requesters of this meeting to motivate their request briefly. For that, can I turn to MP Wescot-Williams? Yes, MP Wescot-Williams, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and a good afternoon to my colleagues, a good afternoon to all tuned into this meeting, a good afternoon and a word of welcome to the Prime Minister and her support staff, a good afternoon to all those in the Tribune. Mr. Chairman, the request for this meeting is quite straightforward. The Prime Minister responded to questions by the letter of March 2023, and the other signatories and myself would like to receive an update from the Prime Minister with respect to the matters as mentioned herein, and hopefully can provide members of Parliament with any answers relating to the matter of electoral reform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams, for that elucidation of the requester's purpose for the meeting. I now give the floor to the Prime Minister and Minister of General Affairs, Ms. Sylvia Jacobs, for her opening remarks and presentation. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Is on? Oh, I was waiting for it to go green. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of Parliament, honorable members of Parliament, Griffier and support staff of Parliament. We're here this afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be here in the House of Parliament to update as requested by our members. In order to shed light on the journey that we have been on for quite some time towards electoral reform, it definitely is taking a much longer time to come to fruition than had been intended. We must also acknowledge that this is not a solitary pursuit. It is definitely a collective effort to strengthen our democracy as a country, as a growing country. As we embark upon this path, it is vital to understand the backdrop against which we operate. So historically, the discussion on electoral reform has been evident since 2014, with countless, of course, newspaper articles and opinion pieces illuminating the subject. offering diverse perspectives, several presentations in and out of Parliament as well. Furthermore, we have had the privilege of 2 lectures on the topic. However, they were centered around the procedural aspects of the laws. In 2016, a draft proposal aimed at amending the Constitution was presented by the then Prime Minister. This proposal carried with it several amendments which regrettably clash with the fundamental belief in allowing elected officials to exercise their vote based on their individual conscience. Consequently, these proposed amendments were not actualized. During my tenure, guided by the outline of my mandate, I undertook the responsibility, I must say, to look into what we could do. Of course, the necessary support or having the needed legislative lawyers, etc., to move it forward as I would have liked has been a challenge. 2 pivotal legislative changes were worked out, however. This week in the Council of Ministers, we were able to amend the kiesbesluit in an attempt to mitigate possible corrupt voting practices by actually approving the removal of the curtains from the voting booths. So this trajectory has to, of course, finalize with signature being sent on to the governor by El Beham. We had, in our overview of possibilities to do, seen this as one of the tasks that could be carried out, but it did take some time to do it, especially also, seeing that several MPs had voiced this and also sent requests to have it done as well. So this formed part of, in terms of our review, as one of the smaller, quicker things that could be done. And so we're happy that we're able to move this forward, seeing that this was also mentioned here as well in the floor of Parliament. We were also able to pass a piece of legislation through the Council of Ministers, which addresses the remuneration of the main voting bureau members. This has also been for a long time on pause, on hold, and has actually negatively impacted their ability to do their due diligence when requested to do so. The way forward, one of the pieces of legislation, however, that is not anywhere near completion, which would have been the wish, is the one related to the one that was presented back then on the, what was it called again? The one to regulate the dates in case there is a snap election, because every election is regulated the same way, to eliminate the possibility that anyone would be negatively impacted from taking part in said elections. That amendment carried with it several other amendments that would be more constitutional of nature and is being reviewed at the moment by our legislative lawyer. And once we have a better idea as to what is still possible with that, I will then inform the Parliament and public at large. But at this point, it is not at a stage where we can say it is possible to be completed within a short period of time. Several questions still, of course, are quite alive within the community as to what can be done. And the last time I was here, we'd had some, let's say, sentiments from the public based on a survey that we had done. And those points are still points that we would want to address moving forward. Some may have possibilities to be dealt with, others not in the short term. So far, I must say the majority would require huge legislative changes that would have to go through the full amendment process, some even touching on the Constitution as well. So, some of these topics that were brought to light, but are not limited to the following. Many of our people feel that there is a lack of accountability by elected officials, that the lynch law should be eliminated, that we should do more to combat vote buying, and the list goes on to echo the sentiments of frustrated voters. So to combat these issues, my team, which includes the cabinet and some other members, that's with the Department of Legal Affairs and Legislation, as well as Civil Registry, to be able to identify items that could be tackled in the short term. short as well as long term. Some of the items mentioned that we would like to say forward in our agenda for discussions within the population as well as within this August body would be improving our measures to eradicate any alleged corrupt practices. So removing the curtains is one, but there are several rules and regulations that are, let's say, governed by lower legislation that we will be looking at, the way in which the voting takes place, etc. So strengthening those measures to ensure that we can have a transparent process, but one that is that eliminates as much as possible the possibility for corrupt practices. Also increasing more vigilance at the voting station. The discussion also came up, which I would love to hear what the Parliament has to say about this in terms of eliminating dummy ballots, which have been used in the past and ended up in the actual counting. So possibly eliminating those and just having the possibility for the parties to use a large document to educate voters, and we as government also, as we go along with this electoral reform educational campaign within the community moving forward, would also spend some time ensuring that voters are well educated as to what a valid vote would be. Because I'm sure several who may have erroneously messed up their votes were not aware that they were doing so. So we feel that education is also part of the trajectory moving forward, ensuring that our population is well aware of the validity of their vote, the strength of their vote, and how to ensure that it counts. I already mentioned the removal of the curtains. Another aspect that is already legislated, but not possible for this year, even though we would have loved for it to have been, is the possibility for electronic voting. That is already legislated. However, there would be a serious investment that would need to be made, training, etc. So that may be something more for the longer term. Another discussion that came up, Mr. Chairman, members of Parliament, was the current 1% needed to be able to sign up a list. I think to also eliminate, let's say, to ensure that we have the support of the population, a good counting of the population, the possibility to increase what you would need to be able to present your list as a list to be voted upon. Currently, it's 1%. I think it would be an interesting discussion to whether increasing that number could make it less watered down, maybe, and ensure that parties who are postulating themselves actually can get the support needed to represent the populace. So eliminating the need to have that need for all of the extra recitals, etc. So there's the 1% that is currently on the books. I would like to hear from the members of Parliament what they think about possibly, and the population, increasing that percentage to be able to sign up your list. You know, you have to come to the civil registry and sign with your ID card to say that, yes, this party has the support to be on the list, the ballot to be elected. Yes, and one of the last points that we discussed was actually, this came up several times, and especially from our students in the diaspora, is their ability to vote, including them as kiesgerechtigden. The discussion even came up, the possibility of separating, because there are, in other parts of the kingdom, the possibility for you to vote in your elections, even though you're not in the country. And so we would like to explore that possibility, especially when we're talking about our students, especially, but not exclusively, because they are the ones that we are exporting to grow in their knowledge and awareness. And we're seeing too with social media, many are still very much involved. They have a lot to say. They have a lot they want to contribute. And mainly because I believe they want to come back. And I think if they have more of a say, they would be even more willing to come back. That's my personal opinion, based on the discussions that I've had with many of them over the years. And I think also citizens at large, wherever in the diaspora, should be able to vote. So really looking at moving towards electronic voting, all of these progressive moves, I believe, are things that as a growing country we could look at to be able to increase the participation within our electoral system to ensure that we are representing the people who love and care about St. Martin in that process. So for a fact, if you are living in St. Martin, you can vote in the Dutch elections, or anywhere within the kingdom or anywhere within the world, you can vote in the Dutch elections in the Netherlands. There is a discussion on municipality versus we only have one election. So that would then be, of course, a debate and can have impact on the Constitution as well. But I think it's something important that we as a country need to look at for the long term. It is not possible for right now, but if we are going to say we're serious about being inclusive, I think ensuring that St. Martiners, wherever they are able to vote is something that we should consider. This one? I believe I've summarized the main points that we would like to see in terms of working on. As I mentioned before, yes, the main voting bureau remuneration amendment has been submitted. Long term, there are still some other files pending. We initially discussed the option of assistance from a consultant, so that, as I mentioned before, not having enough legislative lawyers has proved to be a challenge for the Department of Legal Affairs and Legislation, and we are currently engaging a consultant to assist us and also to deal with some other. He's currently looking at the snap election one, but he will be also looking at all of the other pending ones and other legislation that are also a priority for government. The TWO has also expressed the willingness to assist in helping us to get legislative assistance moving forward, because they see that as a key issue that we are having across the board, and that those meetings will continue over the next couple of weeks in terms of finalizing how that assistance will look like. Another piece of legislation that I think is very, very important that as a parliament government we should do, and I think I've heard it also here, but this has been discussed strongly also with the outgoing governor and the new governor as well, is that we move towards ensuring that we can draft amendments and legislation in the English language. One of the key reasons we are seeing too with even the Department of Legal Affairs, there are lawyers that have been educated, but in English, that then have to go through a much longer process. They're not seen as necessarily being able to fill the function. And though it might take them a bit longer, if we at least start the process of drafting laws in English, that would eliminate that challenge as well. Both languages are our national languages, and it is high time, 13 years in, that we increase the possibility for all our educated persons in this field to be able to work to assist to grow the country. So all the current laws that are not yet formally translated should be done as soon as possible, so that's a priority, so that all have access to it, but we are looking at being able to draft as well as amend laws in English. We are still also on a trajectory, as I mentioned earlier, Mr. Chairman, to have engagement within the community, and those announcements as per the dates, etc., who the speakers will be, to engage the population, to educate the population, will be forthcoming as soon as they're finalized. But they have been postponed several times due to other obligations, but I find it very important that we continue to educate the population and ensure that they are aware of their rights and contribute towards the discussion that I've just brought forth here in terms of possibilities for change and reform within our electoral system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Members of Parliament, you've heard the opening remarks from the Prime Minister regarding the topic today. I see we have some members signed in for the Central Committee meeting, so I will go in order of the sign-in, and we start with MP Wescot-Williams.
Thank you once again, and thank you, Prime Minister, for providing a brief update on where things are at right now. And with your indulgence, I would like to firstly refer to some of the answers provided in your letter of March and ask for any follow-up on those issues. Through the chairperson, Prime Minister, with respect to the question about the proposals received from 2 members of Parliament to limit potential electoral fraud, the answer was that the respective proposals are currently under review for consideration and will form part of the dialogue moving forward. Earlier today, we received your update on that response with respect to the removal of the black curtains. And so I want to ask on the other proposal that had to do with the ballot itself and barcoding the ballot. Is there any progress on that? And in the discussions, has it been taken up? Like I've heard some members, some persons suggest that another way of dealing with this matter could be electronic voting. So if the Prime Minister can share her views on that. So what's the status on that proposal, and is it being looked at in the context as well of electronic voting? My question, another question again, to which I received an answer, was the following. Has the government considered any measures towards strengthening the electoral party system, such as every political party having to prove sufficient support for its candidates list, so sort of a pre-election? Secondly, to give more content to the individual candidate's declaration of agreement with the list on which he or she appears in accordance with Article 25 of the Election Ordinance. For example, by adding a covenant that a candidate is aware and in agreement with the main views, directives, and principles of the party, and thereto concurs to participate as a candidate for party X or Y. And then to that, Mr. Chairman, the Prime Minister responded that these items can surely be taken into consideration during the public dialogue on electoral reforms. And the Prime Minister continued in her answer, I look forward to Parliament's contribution towards these discussions as well as committee meetings called for this purpose. The change that could reduce this phenomenon would be to legislate that the seats earned by the party remain with the party should one find themselves in a moral dilemma of no longer being aligned to the party one has signed on to. And it will be interesting, the Prime Minister continued in her answers, to see whether a majority would agree with this. My question there too, through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Prime Minister, has any further discussion, consultation, whatever, with respect to this particular point taken place? So is there any follow-up to discussing those proposals? Then, as I continue, Mr. Chairman, some months ago we received, upon request, the survey, or the outcome of the survey as commissioned, and by the government, and thus my question is, have any specific steps been taken with respect to the information from the survey? So for example, a majority highlighted this area, so that's the area we either will research, have research, or will not research. So was anything done specifically with the outcome of the survey? Is a symposium still being planned? That was a matter mentioned as a project of the government going forward. In all of these discussions, consultations, does the government have a framework of the priority areas it wants to address as part of electoral reform? So again, does the government, I don't expect a worked out paper, but does the government have a framework of its priorities with respect to electoral reform? So outside of the very broad electoral reform discussions, what are some of the government's priorities, immediate priorities? The Prime Minister spoke about measures to strengthen the process. Can that be a little more elucidated upon? I took note of the answer which ties into a previous question that I had, and that is the issue of the electronic voting. Yes, it is currently part of our laws, and I understand the Prime Minister to say that while maybe desirable, it's not something of definitely this election because of different circumstances, cost and investments, etc. So that's understood where the electronic voting is concerned, making it even more necessary to answer on the part of the barcoding of the ballot. And by indicating that double ballots ended up in the counting of the ballots, I asked myself, how has it been justified? Because if you have more ballots than persons who should have voted, that would be an issue. And I hear what the process is. Of course, I know what the Prime Minister is talking about, but would not something of that nature have had to appear as an inconsistency in the counting of the ballots, is my question, vis-a-vis those who have voted? So, yeah, so I don't know if the Prime Minister has any further thoughts on that matter. With respect to the party system strengthening, has the government identified any ways or areas that this could possibly be done? I am sure the Prime Minister, no, I can't say I'm sure the Prime Minister would concur. I would say I'm sure the Prime Minister understands that if one takes into consideration right now, 1, the election law, 2, the law on registration and finances of political parties, and 3, our Constitution, that there are some conflicting stipulations as far as the party system is concerned. One of those being, for example, that the party is responsible for the responsible might not be the exact word, but the party is responsible for the financing of the individual candidates, because it has to be taken up as part of the entire party's financing. But when you take into consideration the ease with which candidates can, whether openly or otherwise, raise money, while the party is actually responsible, at least in the legal parameters. So when we talk about party system strengthening, has any thought been given especially to that part and especially to the law on registration and finances of political parties? The in the communication that we received from the Prime Minister earlier today, the reference to removing the black curtains, where I see the Prime Minister look a little surprised by that, so which makes me wonder if what we got this morning was indeed today from the Prime Minister. Well, yeah, we got it today. It's dated last week sometime. And yes, so in any case, that's what I'm referring to, Prime Minister. Your letter, your answer on MP Gums's update processing of draft LB Hamkis Bisley. That's the one I'm referring to. And to ask the question that in that communication, it is stated that external help was sought. And I wanted to know if from what else was said by the Prime Minister, I can deduce that that external help was received, approved by the Council of Ministers, and is now on its way to the Governor. So a more clear update as exactly what that means. The Prime Minister, Mr. Chairman, also referred to the fact that the issue of the inconsistencies in terms of dates of snap election, that these are being reviewed by a legislative lawyer. And a little later, the Prime Minister also indicated that that consultancy is also being had, so that legal consultancy is also being had for some other areas. So I just want to emphasize my question again. In contracting legal assistance via a legislative lawyer, has the government outlined which are the areas that, as a matter of priority, as a matter of short-term, medium-term, etc., that they would like this legislative lawyer or lawyer practice to look at? And I will indicate why I would like to hear more specifically. So the black curtain issue apparently has been looked at, and I would like to know, so where is it at right now? And then some other matters have also been given to the legislative lawyer, and I would like to know what are those. So was there a sort of tour prepared by the government for this legislative lawyer, and were priorities identified? So lawyer, could you work on this for me, that for me, and the other for me? Then I want to refer to the issue of the civil registry. And I know the Prime Minister some months ago had given us an update with respect to the cleanup of the civil registry. And we learned that the registered population at the time, I believe the Prime Minister had indicated it was somewhere at maybe 58,000 or something like that. Is there any information regarding who, not by name of course, but who have been taken out of our registry? And, so is there a category of these persons, and I'll mention specifically, these persons who assumingly reside on French St. Martin have been taken out, so, or those who never came in after a month, after years of, so who, how are we to understand, when we clean up the register, what are the categories of those taken out of the register? And I have a very specific interest in persons residing, you could nearly say, on both sides of the island with a Dutch nationality register over here. So I would like to know who all have been taken out of the registry. How has that cleanup gone, in particular with cleaning up. And then I took note and completely concurs with the view of the government about the English language, especially where legislation is concerned. And has anything been undertaken besides having a discussion with the former governor, the current governor? So has anything been done in connection with this matter? One, and of course, very, very evident and prominent in this whole discussion is naturally the timeshare ordinance, drafted in English, rejected. And if the Prime Minister, based on her discussions about legislation in the English language, can indicate does the Prime Minister have any idea where it stands now with that particular matter? Because rather than seeking a solution for having legislation in the English language, from what I understood, and if the Prime Minister could have it verified, because I know it's not directly her ministry, the timeshare ordinance that is, whether it is being looked at to be redone in the Dutch language. So I would really like the attention of the Prime Minister as I remind her at the same time of, and the Prime Minister herself in her capacity as former Member of Parliament might have even been, I don't know, signatory to one or more of the motions regarding the difference, regarding the two official languages and the decision by Parliament on several occasions to seek ways to make the English language, so the mother tongue language, the language of preference, with all of the major changes that that would bring along in our administration and hopefully eventually also in our legal system. And when I say that and mention the legal system, I am sure the Prime Minister too has received the booklet, the language booklet by Dr. Randus Linda Richardson regarding the issue of the language used in our court system. So that I want to tie into the whole issue about the English language and what can be done if we really want to give concrete action to somehow start to give the English the position as one of the official languages, the position that it deserves in our community. Mr. Chairman, I want to leave it here for right now.
Thank you. Before going to the next speaker, I'd like to make a 2-minute adjournment. Good afternoon and welcome back to this Central Committee meeting. For our next speaker, we have MP Heyliger-Marten.
A pleasant good afternoon to you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the Prime Minister and her support staff. Good afternoon to those listening, viewing online, and good afternoon to our visitors here in the Tribune. Good afternoon. Mr. Chairman, through you, I would like to ask the Prime Minister for some clarifications and some questions, some things that I may have missed. If not, let me know if I missed it. Clarity first and foremost on the discussions that was made in during the Council of Ministers regarding the curtains. I'm not sure, was it a concrete decision made that the curtains will be completely eradicated for the upcoming election? Is that a concrete decision voted on and it's now going to become an LB and completed? The outcome of some of the surveys, or maybe, I don't know if it was surveys or focus groups that the ministers of the Prime Minister's cabinet did, the outcome were that the public was, their concerns was lack of accountability. Were there any specification, through you, Mr. Chairman, were there any specification on lack of accountability in what? Is it lack of accountability on the executive branch, the legislative branch, lack of accountability where and what exactly? Was there any mention or examples thereof? The lynch law, the elimination of the lynch law, I was going to ask the Prime Minister this until I heard that as well. So publicly, they're stating, their statements mean, the sentiments is that they want to eliminate the lynch law. So through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, what's her take on dualism versus monism, you know? Prior to this, we had a dualistic, monistic system, and now we have a dualistic system for the last 13 years. What is her take on that? Do you think we should continue there, or is that something that has been discussed? Has there been any pros and priorities, not like a weighing of pros and cons to maintaining this system that we have right now? Also, the fact that, let me see what other questions I have. Oh, I haven't heard any discussions regarding the screening law. Maybe I may have missed it, and I don't know if that was a discussion that the Council of Ministers had, or any other, maybe the Prime Minister's discussion. Is it something that the ministry is thinking on maintaining, amending, or maybe pulling back? Is that something that, was that also up for discussion, the screening law? And lastly, let me see, no, there's one more. Regarding, I haven't heard any discussions on that either. I'm hoping I'm mentioning the correct Article 50 regarding a member of parliament being convicted. Right now, there's a loophole in that constitution, in that article, that allows certain member of parliament that are convicted to still represent the country. Is that something that we're going to, that we're looking into maintaining, broadening the scope, or maybe just amending it completely, or taking it out completely like how Curacao has it? You know, if you are convicted for bribery, you're suspended, but if you're convicted for taxation, you can still represent the country. So what are we doing there? Are we going to allow that? Are we going to fine-tune that law? I think it's Article 50. Am I saying it correct? Article 50. So maybe to look into that article as well. Is that something you are considering looking into amending or perhaps pulling back? I think I may have covered everything, Mr. Chairman. With that, I'll just leave it and await the answers from the Prime Minister. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Heyliger-Marten. Next, MP Gums.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to you, Rifir, the Prime Minister and her staff, those in the Tribune, and those joining us online or by other means. Thank you, Prime Minister, for the update. Most of my questions were kind of asked by MP Wescott already, particularly the, I guess, status or where it is in the pipeline of the required changes to the Kies Besluit. Namely, has the Raad van Advies advised it as yet, or is it going there now, just to see what the, I guess, next steps are to get us there. And just two comments. The percentage of signatures required for a vote, as the Prime Minister mentioned, I would actually agree with increasing it. So I do support that particular point. And one of the concerns that was expressed in the committee meeting that we had here in Parliament to discuss the request to change the curtain was that the size of the ballot might make it too obvious who's voting for who, etc. While I don't necessarily agree, because I've voted in Holland and the ballot is like the length of the table, I assume that one way to ease those concerns is to also change the size of the ballot itself, because there's a lot of dead space on the paper that we have been using. So maybe changing the size of the paper should not impact the integrity then of the ballot. So just as a question, if that's something that was also discussed, perhaps in the deliberation over that LBHAM. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, and I see Heyliger-Marten would like the floor again.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I forgot one more question. I also heard through you, Mr. Chairman, that the Prime Minister stated that I don't know if it's a concrete decision or but something that they are considering on eliminating the dummy ballot, and the fact that there was no discussion. I haven't heard anything regarding the barcode that I suggested about close to a year ago. I haven't heard any progress on that. So by eliminating the dummy ballot, will that then maybe then assist with the barcode? Because if you eliminate the dummy ballot having none, then the reason why we wanted initially in my letter, I suggested, well, I mentioned that the dummy ballot is what starts this, what do you call it, the train? What do you call that? Bulgarian train. So is that one of the Bulgarian train? That's what it's called. Yes, I was going to say Romanian, but anyways, Bulgarian train. So it starts with it starts with a dummy ballot going in, and then with the windows closed, you can then go out with your original ballot. So with the elimination of a dummy ballot, then you will of course pay attention if someone is putting something in or putting in the correct ballot in. So I don't know if that is what the Prime Minister is perhaps suggesting to alleviate that Bulgarian train. Maybe that's one of the discussion. Is that the reason for maybe suggesting eliminating it? So just for clarification's sake. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And next we have MP Pantaflet.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, my colleagues of the committee, of course, our Honorable Prime Minister and her staff, those that are sitting in the tribune, especially our MP, Ms. Eudine Waiter, welcome to this meeting, and those who are viewing this afternoon. Mr. Chairman, it's important for us to ensure that, especially when it comes to the election, that things are done in a proper manner and as professional as possible. I have some suggestions, opinions about certain things. For instance, mention was made with regards to the issue of whether the seat should, I believe, remain with the party or go with an individual. My personal opinion is, Mr. Chairman, is that as long as the individual does not win his or her seat outright, the seat remains with the party. That's my opinion, Mr. Chairman. The issue of democracy, the word democracy is used very often, but I can tell you honestly, based on what I'm learning, the longer I live on this planet, there's no real democracy. It is the one that has the power to determine, Mr. Chairman, and I can mention a small example. Certain countries such as the US, China, Japan, and so on, when it comes to certain decisions, they have the veto right. So it's not what the majority says, it's what those that have the power say, because they're trying for years now to get Cuba off of the sanction list. The majority is saying no, but Israel and these countries are saying yes, so therefore, the one with the veto right still remains with the final decision. The matter of the lynch law, let me say this publicly, Mr. Chairman, I benefited from the lynch law because, normally I think before that you had number 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know if it was the leader or the party board that decided exactly who was number 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 on the list. But the fact of the matter is I was number 11, and because of the lynch law, where out of the entire list, I became the 4th highest votes getter, even though I was number 11 on the list. So that issue of the lynch law should be discussed, and I'm sure you're going to have pros and cons, but of course, let's see how it turns out in the future. The matter of eliminating corruption. Corruption, there's always corruption, no matter where, what part of the world, Mr. Chairman. And I'll challenge anyone to deny such. there's always a corruptor, and I don't know if this word exists, is also the corruptee. Mr. Chairman, it depends on the behavior of all of us as individuals, politicians, and the public alike, Mr. Chairman. Because nobody knows who you're going to vote when you go behind that curtain, which might be removed soon. But it's up to the individual who has to vote to determine whether how much their vote is valued to them, Mr. Chairman. Because I'm hearing the same thing over and over again. Mr. Chairman, it's an individual issue. Educating the voters, I believe, is key. That's very important. We should do so. Because sometimes, I believe when they're counting the ballots, someone might put a little dot or a little check mark. They make an intent. They intend to vote for an individual, but because of probably not being properly educated, they didn't do it the right way. So we should look at that to see if we can make sure that that vote counts. I think mention was made, Mr. Chairman, also as it regards the issue of how many persons are needed in order for a party to be able to take part in elections. I do not know what the actual figure is now. So, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Prime Minister, what is the amount required right now for a party to be able to take part in elections? Now, this one, I'm sure, will be controversial. The issue of who can vote, basically, if they're not living on St. Martin. I had a discussion years ago with a deceased, very powerful, very educated, very intelligent civil servant. And one of the things he said to me, be very careful when you go there, because he said there are persons who live in abroad 15, 20, 30 years who still have the Dutch nationality. They can influence the island of St. Martin where they do not live. So do you really want them to take part in the elections? Are they going to return to St. Martin? Are they going to remain abroad? You see? And that was not my remark. It came from this person. And I started thinking. Because sometimes you live abroad, you pick up a culture of where you live. And the culture where you left is completely different. So again, I'm not saying don't. I'm just saying this was brought to my attention. I'm throwing it out here now for us to really think about it. Are we going to include our students who have just traveled, or those who are abroad 10, 15 years, who are working, who want to return home? Are we going to make it open to everyone that has a Dutch passport? So, Chairman, just, I believe, a closing remark. Article 44, I believe, of the Constitution says that Parliament represents the entire population, But Article 45 says, again, that and I paraphrase, that the members of Parliament can be increased from 15 to 17 if the population is 60,000 or more. Now, based on past experience, I believe our registered voters are at the tune of 23,000, I think, if I'm correct. But the population is about 45 or 50,000. So in essence, what I'm trying to say here right now, the minority is deciding for the majority, but the majority are not given an opportunity to vote because why? They don't have a Dutch passport. But the minority is deciding for them because they are considered when it comes to the number of Parliament that can take part in the members of Parliament can take part in election, whether it goes from 15 to 17, they decide, not only those who can vote. Food for thought, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, MP George. Pantoflet, next, MP Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to you. Good afternoon to the Prime Minister and her team. Good afternoon to everyone tuned in. Mr. Chairman, this is, of course, a very interesting topic, and we all have our opinions and perspectives. But I find it very interesting because electoral reform is actually a topic being discussed almost everywhere in the world. For those countries who may have, I think it's first past the poll systems, they're looking at more proportional voting systems. So around the world, this topic is being discussed, but it's a very complex topic. On St. Martin, yeah, it's very interesting because, of course, depending on who you ask, you know, you'll hear a different opinion. In terms of the lynch law, that is definitely an interesting one. I was speaking to a MP in Aruba, and they right now are looking at or having discussions on the change. So with them, it's the old, so-called old way of voting, where the number, your number on the list is what matters. However, of course, those politicians who are more popular are saying, but I got the popular vote. So how is this democratic, right? And here we hear persons talking about, of course, going back to the old ways. So again, you know, discussions that are probably going to continue to happen, but I think that it's important as a country, as a country, we understand what the core issues are and how to solve them, because it's extremely complex. The Prime Minister asked about the 1% needed in terms of signatures, and I agree as well that that number should increase. There's always focus, Mr. Chairman, on persons leaving the party, but the party is made up of people. And in my opinion, we have to look at the minimum standards in which people can postulate themselves. The Constitution says simply, you must be a Dutch citizen over 18. What about minimum standards? You can't run a company without the right education, without the right experience. But you could run a country. So I think we need to look at, again, the core issues in terms of where we want this country to go and make the changes that are necessary where it really counts. I support the voting of persons abroad, of the voting rights, so to say, because the diaspora has an impact. Whether it's students that are gone for 4 to 8 years that are coming back, persons that live in other countries that come back home or that still have families, they have a stake in the development of this country. The thing is, if a party has a clear ideology, this is what we want for the country and this is where we are going, then what is the issue with persons abroad saying, I support that view and that vision? That, to me, it makes it easy, because you're saying clearly this is what we believe in when it comes to education, when it comes to the economy. So if that is what you plan to do, then it should be simple for me to support you, whether I live on the island or whether I'm gone for a couple of years. So we need to look at a number of different, to me, components, Mr. Chairman, that we don't often think about, as opposed to trying to solve what may be surface issues rather than going deeper. What is going to be interesting also, Mr. Chairman, in the next election, I think, or I foresee, this parliament may look very different. We have a number of parties, maybe not more than normal, but what we might see is more parties in parliament. So a more fragmented parliament, and that means a more complex coalition government. What are we going to do then? My only question through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Prime Minister is in terms of the types of reforms, I don't know, via the survey, if the Prime Minister can let us know, let's say based on the people's feedback, what was like the #1 issue and so forth, or what was the #1 or top 3 sentiments, so to say, because again, as I said, it's system, it's components, it's corruption. I'm happy to hear about the curtain because we believe that that is one of the components that'll help. General political accountability is extremely important. So for me, just getting an idea of what was felt to be the biggest issue. But Mr. Chairman, I think we need to look at everything in its entirety. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Duncan. I see no other speakers at this time. Prime Minister, I also have a few remarks that I would like to bring forward. First of all, just some clarity also regarding the dummy ballot. I always, if we're referring to the same thing, I think the voting bureau tends to come up with like a sort of a picture to show people what the ballot looks like, and they watermark it to make sure or try to help with the tampering, but I can understand that some people have used it for wrong purposes. My only concern with that would be, however, is going into this election, considering that we have had quite a long time since election, there are many first-time voters. And this is the first time they will be going into it. I'm wondering if the first time they open a ballot, if that's the first time they even see what a ballot looks like, can that encourage them to maybe make a mistake? Or, you know, just from an educational perspective, if there's no dummy ballot, what is the alternative to just make sure, especially first-time voters, are aware what is expected of them, how to circle it properly? Because even that is also, I think, in the old dummy ballots at the top, it used to put the full circle so they understand it's not a tick or it's not an X. Just in that aspect, has consideration been given to that? Regarding the financing of political parties and candidates, I actually find that in terms of the fairness, so to speak, for candidates, I think candidates are actually in line with the National Ordinance on Political Financing are at a disadvantage. Because when you look at the ordinance, Article 41, when you initially read it, it looks like Section 2 that says a person, company, or institution can make to a candidate of a political party in a calendar year a total of no more than 20,000 guilders, which is a significant amount. However, the issue then arises is that that same institution is not allowed to grant more than 20,000 guilders to the totality of candidates on that list, which means if you were to divide that amongst 23 candidates, they are not allowed to donate, one institution, the total amount that you give to candidates cannot exceed 20,000 guilders. So you can give one candidate 20,000 guilders, but if you were to decide to support multiple ones, you cannot exceed the maximum of 30,000 for the party and 20,000 for candidates because you're capped at 50,000. So I'm wondering if there's consideration in terms of that aspect, because sometimes you may also have multiple candidates that are going to the sponsor. They have to also keep track of it as well. The party then also has to monitor which candidates are going to which person, because that I do agree with MP Wescot-Williams that on the party side, from a reporting perspective, it can be very complicated. But I'm wondering if maybe that aspect of how candidates receive financing should also be considered to be reviewed. On the discussion of the lynch law, I like how MP Duncan brought it forward, because it shows that I don't think there is a one or the other solution, because you have other countries saying they like our solution, and then you have some in St. Martin saying we want to do what Aruba has. So to me, it kind of shows that there are just basically pros and cons to each system. I'm wondering if a sort of a hybrid between the system can work, where you still make it based on the lineup of the list. However, you make the threshold to get your preferential vote lower. So what that would mean is, if there are 5 seats assigned to the party, numbers 1, 2, and 3, and 1 through 5 would get it, with the exception that if someone lower down has, instead of the amount of a full preferential seat, which let's say is 900 to 1,000 votes, maybe it's half of that. So the person that got 450 votes would bump ahead of the person that's 1 through 5. Let's say number 5 have 200 votes. Well, the person with the 450 would then move up. So you're kind of still maintaining as much as possible your 1 through 5, but you're giving the opportunity for a candidate not to have to earn their entire seat, but to move higher up into the ranking. That was like just a thought. I'm sure there are probably some flaws with that as well. But that was something I thought where the concern of, imagine someone pulls 880 votes and the threshold is 900, and the number 20 on the list, they still don't make it to Parliament in the non-lynch law system, for lack of a better term. Whereas, and that's a significant amount of votes. The people really spoke for that candidate, but they're number 20 on the list or even number 10 on the list, so they won't make it to Parliament if we revert the lynch law. However, if you make the threshold half, then that person who has demonstrated, well, I haven't gotten my full seat, but I've gotten a significant number, which is half, then you kind of use both systems. I think something like that would have to be done, because I think switching either or, the pros and cons will become salient, and I can imagine you'll have a very divided parliament on which system is better. Maybe the compromise might be the route. That's just an idea that I had. In terms of the curtain being removed, I and some members of parliament have expressed a concern about the fact that how is privacy of the vote guaranteed? I think MP Emmanuel kind of gave a demonstration where the placement of your hand can make it obvious to anyone that is looking which side of the ballot you voted for. I don't know what that does psychologically to a voter. Some people might choose to underestimate that, but again, we have a lot of first-time voters that are going to be voting in this election. Has consideration been taken to maybe moving the direction of where instead of the voting booth facing the wall, that they're now facing the person? So there's at least this platform here. You can completely see if the person is taking out a phone or something, but you're not seeing where they're moving their hand. Just an idea again. But just in what ways are we able to make sure that the movement of the hand doesn't give away to those looking? Another reason why I bring that up, I remember voting at the old, what's the name of that school in Colby by Old Tree? Sorry, I forgot the name. Charles Leopold Bell School. One of the things I noted there is that there was quite a line to get in. And the voting booths are in the classroom and the windows are open. So you basically have a line of 20 people looking inside on top of the people who are inside. So just to keep that in mind in terms of people that are outside the actual polling room, whether they're able to look inside as to what is happening. And can you explain who is actually allowed to be in the room specifically? Is it a police officer, security, just the voting members? Just to give clarity on that, and is that also a part of the besluit that specifies exactly who can and cannot be in the room during the voting period, and also who can and cannot be in the room during the counting period? So who's observing the ballots? Who is allowed to observe the ballots? What are the procedures to go in there to count? I think that's important for especially other parties that haven't participated before, but also new candidates, for them to know what that procedure is, and also for the general public. Also with regards to the barcodes, I think that is something, again, pros and cons in an electronic voting system where a QR code is used, where it's just a random image. That is something that you can't commit to memory. However, you can commit a barcode number to memory, which means if I know my last barcode digits is 115 and there's a recount, it will be possible to track back and see that 115 voted this way if I want to make somebody know that I voted for them. That's the thing with systems. Every system has its flaws. And that is something that, again, has to be considered. So maybe if there's barcodes, you're talking QR, but then you're still talking electronic voting or some sort of electronic system being involved. Because if it's a Q card, I can't say, well, the image looked like that. You know what I mean? Also, during the recount phase, somebody is able to note, okay, these are the barcode numbers that voted this way. These are the barcode numbers that voted that way. Just some considerations in terms of the possible, negative effects of using a barcode. But there are pros and cons to that as well. I do think that although, let's say in the US, you hear a lot of rhetoric about electronic voting and so on, I think if we can eventually, I know Prime Minister said you can't do that this election, but if there is as safe as possible a way to do so and introduce electronic voting, that can help a lot with the tampering of votes, as long as we make sure the public especially is confident that it is basically safe from any sort of hacking or tampering and so on. I see some other speakers would like the word. MP Gums.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, just a note on your first comment regarding the dummy ballot. Actually, in the committee meeting, I don't know if anybody would recall, but MP Heyliger-Marten had suggested making a dummy ballot a different color. So just print it on a different color, maybe like a faded pink or something like that, to signify, and I think lessen the amount, because I won't lie, we received 25 dummy ballots to hand out to people as a party last time, and I held on to all of them because I was like, no, I'm not going to disseminate this many dummy ballots into the community. But if you count that every party gets about that amount to hand out, you can see where the problem could arise. So I think MP Heyliger's suggestion last time of a different color for the dummy ballot would actually go a long way to combating that. Thank you.
MP Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to yourself, to the Secretariat, to the Prime Minister, and everybody else. Just to piggyback off of what everybody is saying, when it comes to the lynch law, I think that that is a matter of opinion. I myself am here because of the lynch law. Thank God for that. And, but you also have other MPs in here, for example, who were, for example, in the top 5. And I remember MP Heyliger-Marten, after Irma, he decided to go on the bottom of the list, and then he still got elected. So this is something that I think that is very active here in St. Martin when it comes to the current political culture. And it's up for discussion. It's actually a discussion that needs to be had, and everybody can have their opinion on it for their personal reasons. I gave mine just now. But I think that's something to also involve the community, because, it's curious to know how people feel about that. As for the dummy ballots, I had one question, maybe it's a naive one, but what is holding us from, for example, accepting an X marked in front of a candidate as a valid vote? What is stopping us? Because I remember, for example, last election, I specifically had one person in Simpson Bay who voted for me, but because it was an X, it was taken out of the tally. And my question is why? What's the legal basis for not accepting that? Shouldn't we be able to make voting more feasible for the people? That's basically the principle that I was coming with. And also, when it comes to the money that can be given to candidates and or parties, I think that I follow what MP Bryson said when it comes to the landsverordening for the politieke registratie. But in Article 41, indeed, it gives you the limits, but there's a reason for this. The 50,000 guilder max is actually to prevent that one person or one company can influence a party to an extent that is unfair to other donors, for example. We have tendencies here in St. Martin where hotel owners and casino bosses would like to give every candidate $10,000 if they would want to. But then, when after elections, those candidates might have to get a call to do them some favors. That's a reality. That's how it works. So the 50,000 guilder cap is actually to protect political parties from influence from outsiders. That's actually the intention of the law, because if one person can donate 1 million guilders towards a party because there is no limit as to what you can give the candidates, then we might have a bigger problem on our hands than just a Bulgarian train. And I think that's all for me for now, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, MP Heyliger-Marten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick. Yes? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a quick suggestion through you, Mr. Chair, for perhaps the Prime Minister and her cabinet or the COM to consider maybe for the on election day. We have 13, 15 voting bureaus. Most of them should have TVs or flat screens in there. Maybe we can do a digital, a quick 1 minute or 45-second digital display of how to vote before they enter. So every bureau can have, you can create the digital 1 minute display and have it looped at every voting bureau so that people would know how to vote, that it's, that you have to circle, just like as a friendly reminder. And maybe you show them how to vote, and then maybe you fold it and you put it in. It's maybe just having a matter of having that one video. Most schools, most voting bureaus may have a TV that you can just plug in the looped video and then and display it. You may have to spend money here and there, but I'm sure most voting bureau can have maybe something on display indicating how to vote, Mr. Chairman. So something to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others at this time? Okay, Prime Minister, you've received a few questions. Let me adjourn for 1 minute to caucus with the Prime Minister on the way forward. Good afternoon once again. Members of Parliament, the Prime Minister requires approximately 20 minutes. So I will adjourn this agenda point until at least 4:05, but we are going to move over now to the next agenda point. So this agenda point is adjourned, and we move to agenda point 2. Agenda point 2 is the approval of the composition for the delegation and provisions to attend the celebration of Bonaire Day on September the 6th, 2023. That is IS 1006, August 16, 2023. On August 16, 2023, Parliament received an invitation from the government of Bonaire for the members of Parliament and the Griffier to attend Bonaire Day celebrations. This document is registered as incoming document IS 1006, dated 16 of August 2023. All members of Parliament have received a copy of this invitation via email. The proposal is to approve the work visit in order for a maximum of 4 members, as agreed to, so maximum 1 member per faction, to attend this event on behalf of Parliament. Do note that the Secretary General actually will not be attending during this travel, and I believe that week there is also another event. I would like to propose for myself to travel as well, and if there are other members who would like to attend the Bonaire Day as per the invitation. Are you gonna make me go alone? I'm sorry, didn't we say the date? Thought we did. Yes, so the delegation will travel. Yes, but the delegation will travel from the 5th of September through the 7th. This, however, depends on flight availability. 5th through the 7th of September, are there any? No. Okay. So if that is the case, then we'll approve for myself to be traveling to Bonaire for the celebrations of Bonaire Day. If there are no further comments on this agenda point, members of Parliament, I will then adjourn the meeting until 4:05 to allow the Prime Minister to return with the answers to the questions. Yes, so the approval is approved by the Central Committee. Okay. With that, we close this agenda point and adjourn this meeting until 4:05. Good afternoon once again, members of parliament. Welcome back, Prime Minister, those in the tribune and those viewing this meeting. We are here handling the agenda point on the update by the Prime Minister on government's electoral reform trajectory as per the Prime Minister's letter dated March 15th, 2023. We've received some questions from the members of the Central Committee. The Prime Minister has had some time to answer the questions and she's prepared to do so now, so I give the Prime Minister the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will start with answering the questions. It's first of all, let me say thank you to the members because this is exactly what I think is needed, a healthy discussion, maybe even debate. Somebody remarked to me that it's not really, members of parliament aren't really going into what each other are saying for it to be necessarily a debate, but it's good to hear the opinions so that when we get to the discussions within the community, and as I mentioned before, the members of parliament will also be welcome to be at the community discussion so that the community can hear from you as well. So just that basic statement. Thank you for your contributions, your opinions, etc. And I must say, I smiled when I heard the MPs mention the benefit of the lynch law for the presence of some of the members in here. Indeed, when that came up, it was like, how do you get the persons who benefited from something to want to change it? So that's, the reality of what we are dealing with. But hearing from the population, I think as representatives of the population, it's important to know what they're thinking. And while it is not a scientific survey that was done, we did poll over 200 persons, and these were their opinions. So you see these things being discussed on social media all the time, and I think it is good to have the discussions. One MP, Wescot-Williams, asked an update on the barcoding, and several other members discussed that as well. We did not move any further with that. It is something that we can still take into consideration if necessary. So especially if we're talking about other ways of safeguarding the ballots and or eliminating the dummy ballots from being used within the regular voting. As it relates to electronic voting, we consider it something to work towards. We have not taken any concrete steps towards that as yet. As it relates to strengthening, so it is definitely being considered in terms of electoral reform, but the needed preparation has to be there, which I mentioned in my opening statements. Of course, I also heard other members mention of the experience in other countries where electronic voting is concerned. And though we heard about some challenges in Curacao when they did it, we had election observers go to Anguilla recently when they had their last voting, and they experienced it from the main voting bureau and civil registry as a positive experience. So it is something that we have to research, look at best practices for a scale and size. And of course, as I mentioned before, it would aid in us being able to do having the registry for eligible voters vis-a-vis residents. Taking into consideration one of the observations of MP Pantaflet as well in terms of we're basing our representatives on the full population, but actually only using a very small pool of eligible voters. Even when you take out children and others who aren't yet of the age of 18, it's still a small sample as compared to the number of people in our system. In fact, one of the discussions that came up was that even and I started to talk about it in my opening remarks, but I didn't go further, and I would like for persons who are following this meeting to know that this is not, I am not saying government will do this with the things that I've brought forth. What government is doing here is elucidating on the sentiments of the population and looking at what is feasible, engaging them even more, and of course hearing from the members of parliament. But the topic that had come up that I'd forgotten to mention was that persons saw voting, permanent residents being eligible to vote as well. Persons who have lived here for more than 5 years are tax-paying, upstanding citizens, etc. So that, I believe, is something that we should add to the debate as well, that I forgot to mention in my opening statements. And that would then give you a broader base of who's actually determining your number of representatives and is in line with what MP George, I think, was mentioning. MP Wescott also talked about a question she'd asked in our previous meeting about strengthening the party, seeing that it is a party system that we are electing. We didn't find anything in the moment, in this time, since then to say specifically this can be done in the short term, but yes, indeed, I believe all the legislation that regulate parties, the financing of parties, how elections are done, and another mention also screening, etc., all should be evaluated as we do electoral reforms, as we discuss it and make decisions about it. I don't think in the short term that huge differences can be made, but already parties within their party structure can do more, including what I believe another MP mentioned in terms of raising the bar of who is on the ballot for the representatives, to be representatives, to be chosen from. That is within the party's purview unless an individual decides to postulate as an independent by themselves, which has happened also. And there again, that 1%, in my opinion, again, my opinion being a very small number, to be able to say you have signed up and can get on the list. So all these small aspects, I believe, together can make a difference, and so they have the attention of the government, has the attention of the Ministry of General Affairs in charge of elections. So nothing in the content has been adjusted in that regard, and most of the things that have not been done has been mainly due to the fact that we've lacked the necessary capacity to do so. So with the legal legislative lawyer now starting to look at what we consider priority for elections, we are assessing to see as well what can still be done. Including the discussion on that one, I think for sure would require more constitutional changes, but in terms of the party and how it is determined, and I think Mr. Romney had mentioned that as well, that the party election system is of lists, so political parties are not systems of persons, so not candidates. And even though you're voting on a candidate, it is the list that get enough votes to get a seat. As such, seats in Parliament are determined on the basis of the division of the total number of vote cast in an entire constituent state by the number of seats in Parliament. So in his opinion, and that's another thing I would like the legislative persons to look at, a political party that won 10% of the votes should have 10% of the seats, to have that proportionality that is described in our law. So the discussion that ensued was such an interesting one with the organization in terms of how we are calculating the seats once the clear number that were won are and then divvying up recitals, etc. That also should be looked at in terms of is it a fair distribution or not. I'm looking at several documents to ensure I have the, the questions. So bear with me. The question the MP asks about considering whether parties can prove that they have sufficient support for their candidate list, that falls in line with the increasing from 1%. So I'm hearing more different factions mentioning that that is something that they would support. So that is, I think, something we will definitely pursue. specific actions that were taken with the survey was ensuring that these are topics that we will feature on the discussions within the community, as well as highlighting them here. So all the points that I brought forward were some of the more prevalent ones. One that I didn't mention, which I consider to be also, could be a bit controversial, but was mentioned several times, maybe not by a majority, was we elect members of parliament, and they don't see, well, I did mention that, what was elected reflected. So because we have elected officials that can then determine that they're going over to be ministers, what now becomes a final seating in parliament wasn't what was essentially elected. So in terms of persons, so some of the survey gave the impression like they don't feel like they get what they voted for, basically. Some people mentioned that, but I was going somewhere with that. Yes, and the question was asked whether they think that our system should elect the prime minister. In some countries, the prime minister is elected and then brings their cabinet with them. So it's not done by the parliament as it is done here. So whether we want to go towards your electing your executive as well as your legislative branch, which would be a structurally dualistic system, as we have in first and second house in the Netherlands, and in other places you have two elections and really a separation of powers. In our system, we have one election. In the past, I think the Member of Parliament, Heyliger, clarified in the break that what she was referring to was having that one election that would determine island council as well as executive council, while it is now chosen by the branch that makes up the majority how the executive branch will look. So are we willing to have a discussion as to whether we should elect a prime minister and his or her cabinet, or the prime minister and leave it to the prime minister to choose his or her cabinet? So those three options came up. So we continue as we do now. We have whether each party put forth who would be their chosen prime minister and allow a majority of constituents to choose, and or that the prime minister puts forth a cabinet. So the party puts forth not just a prime minister, but these are the persons that we would have as the executive branch, that you know exactly what you're voting for. The member also asked about, as it regards to the removal of the curtains, several members asked that. So as I mentioned, this was one of the things that we saw as a quick win as well. Initially, the legislation was not worked on as we would have thought. We were still looking at possibilities. However, after much prodding and prompting, I was able to get it to the Council of Ministers, as I mentioned last week. And from there, it is then going on to via the governor to the Raad van Advies as an LBHAM. That's the current status of it, if I wasn't clear in my opening statements. The legislative lawyer that is assisting the Ministry of General Affairs at this moment has been utilized by other ministries, came highly recommended, so there wasn't necessarily a terms of reference. And as I mentioned, the TWO is looking positively at assisting for more projects, but this project we are doing at the moment within our purview. I'm looking forward to him assisting with more legislation as we determine which are the priorities. So I'm not able to provide that priority list at this moment, but as soon as we've done so moving forward with the assistance that we're getting, I will share this with the Parliament. The cleanup of the Civil Registry Department remains at around 58,000 residents. I cannot at this time give a breakdown in terms of who has been taken out of the registry, but in discussion with Civil Registry Department when they were updating, they, as I mentioned also in press briefing, They follow a trajectory of trying to locate persons who have not had any contact for a long time. And after a particular amount of time, which I can't recall off the top of my head, I will ask for a info sheet to be drafted regarding that and publicized, so that people can know you run the risk of being deregistered if you do not respond to queries coming from civil registry, if you do not respond to mail being sent to the registered address that you have. So one of the areas where people were coming back in is like, now you come to renew a registration or something, they realize they've been deregistered and they can re-register right away. It's not a problem. But the challenge we have with return voting cards, for instance, is just that. People move and they have not stated what their new address is, which by law you have to do. So the Civil Registry Department, as well as my person, continue to encourage persons to ensure that the Civil Registry is aware of your current address. Nothing specific as yet has been done as it relates to the drafting of English laws. And I did take note of Dr. Anders Linda Richardson's translation of key terms, etc., to facilitate court cases. And we believe that a priority for this government is to ensure that the full translation takes place of the laws, and we'll be looking at, the challenge up to now has been literally the budget to do so. It wasn't specifically budgeted for. So hopefully in budget 2024, we'll be able to focus on that. MP Heyliger asked on the decision of the black curtains, which I already elucidated on. The statement of lack of accountability that had come up in the survey related to political parties as well as candidates, so at all levels of representation within government and parliament, as well as just parties. They would like to see more accountability. So I think the proposal in terms of strengthening the party, political party laws, in terms of that there's that stronger party affiliation, like there used to be in the past. Yes, the lynch law made it that individuals on a party can be elected wherever you are on the list. I don't think the intention of the lynch law was to then create kingpins, but that is what has happened. You've become a more individualistic instead of a more party-oriented system. So we have to look at ways in which we can strengthen the party so that literally the party that wins the seats continues to be represented throughout the term and can be represented proportionally as has been determined by our democracy. And I think I already clarified that the MP was talking about dualism and monism. And when we looked that up, it was more in relation to laws, whether you are based on international law or national law and how you do that. But the MP elucidated or clarified that she meant more of the system where you had commissioners and island councilmen, vis-a-vis here now you have only members of parliament that are elected and then they appoint ministers. Would I want to see us go back to the system where you're elected and that person is also, like in Anguilla and other places right now, in the elected branch as well as in the executive branch, and therefore holding itself accountable? I think personally, I believe that the separation of powers should be there, but we should probably look at electing that second branch as well to have a better accountability maybe, or a more transparent accountability. Another thing that could be looked at in the debates moving forward is whether we would want to have district-based representation versus the way it's done now, so that every district know who their representative is. Are we too small for that? We can look at other systems within the region and see how that works in terms of accountability, in terms of visibility, and in terms of people feeling represented. As I mentioned before, I believe the screening law and all laws related to election and governing is up for debate and discussion. As it relates to Article 50, where MPs are convicted, it stipulates quite clearly which article, which criminal offenses will make it that you cannot represent or not. And I've asked the Department of Legal Affairs to prepare a info blot that would say specifically, because it mentions numbers, which it's not clearly evident what those numbers are and requires further research. So I think preparing an info, for me, it's important that we give as much information to people as possible. So that we would put out that information to the public so that you know what offenses could cost you your seat in Parliament, or what convictions. I already answered on where the LBHAM or the draft LBHAM is for the removal of the curtains. MP mentioned, also MP Gums mentioned, the color of the ballot being a way to determine and distinguish visually that it's not a real ballot. But we also discussed the size, not having it be the same size as a ballot, whatever the dummy ballot may be. I know for instance, in going about and informing within a community in previous elections, we've made letter size or legal size, just normal paper size ballots that you can use in demonstrating to persons how to vote, as long as you can see the picture, the list of names, etc., the circle. I think there's a big misconceptions about what constitutes a legal vote. I've heard some things mentioned here on the floor in Parliament that are acceptable votes, which people seem to think are not. It has to be in the circle, whether it's a dot, whether it's an X, whether it's a check. It only becomes challenging if a check goes beyond the name, that the intention of the voter is not clear. So there have been, over the years, been graphics made, there have been info videos made by the Department of Communication and Main Voting Bureau / Civil Registry to put that info out there. So I will ensure that that information is part of the education campaign moving up towards election, and also in schools, because some of our just turned 18 voters are still in school, and it is important. I could remember as a teacher in 6th grade, us using those same letter size ballots to have the students vote and have elections within school as well. Mock elections, of course, to kind of pale what the children are hearing their parents say. So changing the color, changing the size, all of these small things are being looked at. Something I didn't mention earlier is that the actual ballot is signed on all 4 sides by the Main Voting Bureau. So one of the things that I have discussed is that there will be extra vigilance to ensure that in returning it to the bin, it is refolded as it was given to you, so that it is visible, the signatures are visible, and therefore eliminating chances of other types of documents being dropped into the box. Someone asked, I don't know if I noted it or if the staff noted it, about the number of ballots vis-a-vis the number of voters. That was not what I mentioned. I said if they put what I've learned now is called a Bulgarian train and not something invented in St. Martin. Good to know that they start the train of ensuring the vote by dropping a dummy ballot or a blank piece of paper or whatever the case may be, whatever they use. That would not mean that the number doesn't add up. It would mean that somebody lost the opportunity to vote. So somebody gave up their opportunity to vote to be able to ensure X amount of other votes. So we would like to eliminate that, and so extra vigilance within the room, ensuring that, so right now, it is the main vote, the committee that has been submitted is 5 persons that are usually in the room. It can be 3 to 5 that are dealing with calling the names, checking the IDs, etc. Only 3 are actually doing physical work. So the discussion has been had in terms of the training to ensure that the 2 who are not will be, and looking at any excessive movements within the booths, Dutch and English jumping in and out of my head, or looking at how the papers are being deposited in the bins. So extra vigilance will be there, the training will be there, and it is important that all booths are carrying out the rules and regulation in the same way. Something I don't like to hear is, oh, but when I went to that voting station, this was allowed. When I went to this voting station, that is allowed. Across the board, we must ensure that it is happening in the same manner. MP Pantofflet made a couple of suggestions, and I think making a change that only if an individual is outright elected that they can determine for the seat would then put, again, more power with the parties. The putting your list together in the past where the top voters, depending on how many seats were won, is then the power is by the party or by the party leader, with the vote determining who gets the seats. You're putting it in the hands of the voters. I think it would be difficult to turn that back. So finding ways to ensure that the party is still strengthened if it's a party election would be a way to continue to have that level of democracy, but that the party is still strong in its election. So not only did 6 individual members on this party get elected, individually have the most votes, but this party had 6 seats. And I think that is what they're saying in terms of not seeing what was actually won at the end of the election. The discussion on the veto right, I don't know how that would impact us, so I'll have to have further discussion on that. The lynch law will remain in debate, as I mentioned. I don't see that being removed, but it can be debated for sure. And ways to strengthen the party within our system is something that I am more keen on doing. I think MP mainly made some statements that are basically, that can be seen as in line with broadening who was eligible to vote. So I mentioned also the debate on whether permanent residents and persons from St. Martin who are abroad. Of course, criteria for that would have to be set, and it would not be every Dutch passport holder. That would mean that the entire Netherlands could vote, for instance, and every Dutch passport holder within the world. We don't definitely want that. We have the discussions, Anguilla has belonger status, so sort of like the belongers to St. Martin. And somebody might say, oh, put a year cap on it, but I might not live here, but I might have property here. I might have my children and grandchildren living here. So you still have ties to the island. So I think we would have to determine, the criteria for the diaspora, but I believe belongers definitely should have the opportunity. And just like for instance, for study financing, if you went to school here for 5 years, you start, and you're a Dutch passport holder, you're automatically eligible for study financing as well. So we can look at what other criteria is used for other things and see what fits with this right to vote. MP Duncan made some statements about in answering the question about who's allowed to be in in the voting booth, no, not the booth, polling station. I think I mentioned the main voting bureau. Yes, they usually do a tour, they visit. The assigned persons to run the polling station, which are usually 5, and they have a chairperson. A police officer is usually there, and the laws have been adjusted back and forth by ministerial regulation. So this is an area where we can determine, that's another small win, that we can determine who else can be there. I can agree with, in terms of, since the proposal is there now to remove the curtains, that you limit who can be able to look into. At this stage, it is still that it is facing the persons who are manning the booth, that they can see what is happening, instead of what was proposed by one of the other members of Parliament, I believe Mr. MP Bryson. It was brought to my attention that there's a cardboard box put on a table in certain places where the vote takes place within our kingdom. I was quite shocked. And in other places that there is no curtain as well, in the Netherlands, for instance, and other places. So I believe that any opportunity to ensure the privacy of the vote will be done, even though the curtains are removed, if, of course, the Landsbesluit doesn't have any negative advice. And MP Duncan's discussion on the minimum standards, I believe that is one of the areas where the parties have to play that role. So I look forward to seeing that. She concurred with the voting rights of the diaspora, and I think I mentioned the top concerns of the community were the ones I highlighted in my opening statements. MP Bryson, I believe, wanted some clarity on the dummy ballot. Have I clarified it sufficiently? And we are definitely going to ensure that the education of our voters takes place in the coming months as part of the electoral reform campaign, but also as part of just preparation for the election itself. As I mentioned, videos have been made of live persons as well as graphics that go out there. And I will see whether having it displayed at the station itself is a possibility as well. The hybrid lynch law, that is something we will have to have further discussions on. It's the first I've heard of that proposal. So we'll be looking into that. Always innovative. Just pull it out of his hat. But that's what discussions and debates are about, so that we can look at possibilities. Then we went back to Mr. Peterson, who mentioned why no X. X is allowed. So X is allowed. I said that once it is in the circle, you can do a crusher, you could do a tick. We've had big debates. If the tick came out of the circle but it didn't go into the box of the next candidate, it's valid. So even if at the polling station there's a debate, once it gets to the main voting bureau, they go back over all of what has been deemed invalid and they check it again. So then it's checked by one body, all the ballots that were deemed invalid. So the importance is to keep it in the circle, whatever you do. You don't have to fill up the whole circle. The intention of the voter has to be clear. Something that I really want to mention here, I hope people are listening. Don't write all over the ballot. Don't write, vote for so, I vote for so and so. He's the best or she's the best. That makes your vote invalid. And that's a shame. So really and truly, if you want your vote to count, only circle in front of the name of the person who you would like to see elected. Unless it is your intention that you don't want your vote to count, which I was made to understand is a signal as well. The discussion on the political financing, there were no rules before, there are rules now. The 50K, as MP mentioned, is indeed there to limit the ability or, in fact, spread it so that there's also less onevenredigheid. There's less inequality. I guess all parties can get the same amount. Hopefully, they would be able to compete on the same level. I know in some countries, and even the one right across the border, there's a limit as to how much in total the party can receive as campaign donations. So they can spend their own money, but there's a limit in how much can be given. So it can be even stricter, as a matter of fact. So would we like to also debate how campaign financing is done? As I mentioned before, everything is debatable, and all legislation, I believe, should be evaluated in terms of its effectiveness. And if we don't find it to be effective to do what it was intended to do, then we need to debate how that should be done. Let me look to see if I answered everything. The way forward regarding the discussed suggestions and concerns. So, as I mentioned before, we're busy planning some, while I would have wanted to have more, at least 1 or 2 town hall type meetings where these same points can be brought forward. We can then put out opportunities for more persons to take part in a survey, to give their input, so that we have a feel from the community as to what will be done, after which we still would want to have that symposium as had been advertised, let's say, when we first started talking about this. I think it's important that we go in depth in these discussions, educate the population, as mentioned before, and get their input for the changes we would like to make. And as a matter of fact, I'd like to challenge the various parties out there going to contest the next election to make that part of your have a stance as part of your party program to meet the needs that we would like to see. I don't think anybody wants to be in a system where you're considered corrupt, where you're considered not a true representative of the people, etc. We want to grow. We are a young constituent state, yes, but we want to grow. And we want to continue to improve in the manner in which we represent the people, because it is an honorable job. And it is unfortunate that many in the community do not think so. Many sacrifices are being made, and I would like to thank all in advance for contributing to the dialogue that is needed on this topic, so that we can, because when we talk about ourselves too, the way we talk about ourselves, and I notice rampantly on the radio these days, that's the thing. We are giving others the permission to talk about us that way as well. And we're talking with very broad and sweeping statements. Yet we expect to encourage our young professionals to want to get involved and to be a part of the change they want to see. Sometimes it can be quite disconcerting and discouraging. So I encourage us to speak with positivity towards the change we want to see in this country, and to actually be the change we want to see. A lot of the young people you think are not looking are looking, and even some who are former politicians, they are saying, but why didn't you do it when you were there? So keep that in mind while we express our views, and ensure that we're not making sweeping statements and sweeping everyone under the rug. With that being said, Mr. Chairman, I'm hoping that I've covered most of the questions posed by the members of Parliament, and if not, then it would be possible to send those in writing, and we will respond accordingly. And I look forward to the participation of the members when the town hall meetings and symposium are organized. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. We do have probably a couple more comments before you leave. I see MP Wescot-Williams would like the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Prime Minister, for the discussion. I would have loved if we could have had sort of an interactive discussion. As you speak, we speak, but that's not the case right now. Just briefly, Prime Minister, through the chairperson of this meeting, the some of them are just notifications. One, the issue of increasing the voters' base by allowing, at the time, it was, I think, only specifically dealing with students abroad, and that was advised upon negatively. So such a proposal was in procedure before, and the Prime Minister is shaking her head, so clearly aware of that. Just wanted to put that out there. And two very practical issues, and I asked the Prime Minister rather, if in discussions with the members of the main voting bureau, if some very practical adjustments did not come up. And I asked this because I know some time ago, the main voting bureau, in making a presentation to Parliament, had come up with some suggestions in terms of the entire process and stuff like that. Two practical issues, for example, being one, the use of a telephone. That's already there in the law, and we know it's difficult, has been difficult to implement. So has that particular issue been looked at? Again, trying to curb whatever practices that are less desirable. Secondly, we don't have a current coding of our ballot, but if there's anything that could be considered a sort of a legitimizing of the ballot, it's that signature. And according to law, that signature need to be, however you fold the ballot, that signature needs to be visible. So exactly, that's where I was going with the issue of this dummy ballot being thrown into the ballot box. You know, so I just wanted, because currently that's the way the official ballots are identified. Yes, so so those two issues, the telephone and the signatures on the ballots. The information sessions, you know, just information regarding the voting, et cetera, is there towards now the next election, the next campaign season? Has the government already decided that, let's say by the 1st of, I don't know, maybe September, 1st of October, that process will start, where really you say, you know, as of today, you'll be getting all the information, different media sources, etc. So is there an information campaign scheduled to start at a particular time is my question. And I still miss from the Prime Minister, Mr. Chairman, like an overview. I understand the consultation and absolutely nothing wrong with the public consultation, but does the government at this time have the government already outlined for itself priority areas in the context of electoral reform? And if so, which are these? And I ask this because, again, the Parliament of St. Martin has developed a tour with respect to electoral reform with specific items in the tour to be researched, to be advised upon, and for which legislation will be eventually drafted. So and it is not the first time I bring this forward in terms of synchronization of our activities, but these issues, the Parliament of St. Martin has identified issues that are to be put out there. We too are looking at the legal assistance in order to get it done and to get drafts made. So again, does the government, in all its discussions and from surveys, has the government identified any priority areas which, regardless of public consultation or not, the government will be pursuing, in addition to, for example, the one on removing the curtains, is my question. I took note of the Prime Minister's statements with respect to election date and the can something more be said about it. I took note of the latest statement that the date has been decided upon. Correct me if that is not what was stated, but there's still some legal advice to be had. So if that can be clarified. On another note, the matter of so-called preferential votes. I want to state here that was the case before the Lynch law. So there was the possibility, albeit that it didn't have to be a seat total, could have only been, could have also been part of that, but that was already part of our system before the list. So you had a four-core stemmer wherever you were on the list, you could have been, you could have gotten your seat based on the criteria for preferential votes. So I just wanted to make a mention of that. That's it, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, MP Wescot-Williams. Prime Minister, I too just have 2 points that I wanted to raise in kind of in line with some of the answers that you gave. First of all, I want to maybe clarify and give a better example of where my concern lies with the financing of political parties. Because although the law is about the financing of political parties, I'm actually focused on how the law actually affects candidates. I don't believe the cap of 50,000 guilders needs to increase. I think there should be a cap. I mean, although considering that 50,000 guilders in 2010 is now, when you take inflation, closer to 75,000. But nonetheless, the issue is that if you take the 20,000 guilders and you divide that amongst every candidate on a full list, that amounts to 896 guilders that that candidate can get if the party, if the company decides to support every candidate. So, and when you take 869 guilders, that's the maximum they can get, versus 30,000 guilders that the entire one party can get. Now, I'm a party leader, and I am self-saying that is quite unfair. That's something that it clearly favors the political party, and yet our system, like we just have here debating with the Lynch system, it's the candidates need to also profile themselves. So my view on it, and Prime Minister, I don't really need you to go deeply into it because it's not quite electoral reform, and I get that. But it's something for us to think about, that whether our political financing system, if we are saying on the one hand that the individual candidates that get the most votes will be the ones that will sit in Parliament, do we make our financing system reflect that a little more closely? That's just a general question that I want all of us to kind of keep in mind. Then when you look at the cost of, let's say, for individual candidates, I remember when I first ran, I did an interview with someone and it cost $250. Today, that same person is charging triple that for an interview. Let's say you want to do a radio interview. The cost, as I think you and I both know, has gone through the roof. So whether people think that you know, every democracy political financing is part of it, we're one of the few that actually has it capped. Even in the Netherlands, it is not capped. As a matter of fact, in the Netherlands, political parties are, to some extent, subsidized by the government. So to one extent or the other, political financing is part of the electoral process and part of the democratic process. And I do think there's sometimes some considerations to be made to make some reviews there. The other thing that I didn't really, I think you briefly mentioned it, but the question that was posed by MP Grisha Heyliger-Marten about the screening. While it is a parliamentary election, one of the first things that is done after the parliamentary election is that if it is not one party, there's a coalition formed, and then it is time to select ministers. And those ministers have to go through a screening process. I remember in 2021, we had a presentation from Gregory Bakkers, who was talking about the instructions over the years that were given to the government. And to my surprise, he pointed out something that I don't know if many of us are actually aware. One of those instructions was the instruction of October the 17th, 2014, that basically introduced the system of screening that we have now. So in there, it states that the screening would be done, would involve the Attorney General, the St. Martin's Security Service, VDSM, etc. However, it also states in the last article, this decree shall enter into force on the day following the date of the issue of the Gazette. So this was October the 17th, 2014. And then it says, it applies until the next parliamentary election. So that decree has expired. But we continue to use this system. Now, I don't think that just because the decree has expired, that means we stop everything. What I do think, it is now in the hands of the government to decide what works and what doesn't work. I think it's important that the government consider ahead of the election, take a decision on what is going to be done in terms of minister screening going forward. What is also interesting to note is that since this decree was signed, the National Ordinance on the Integrity of Ministers was also amended on the 30th of May, 2015, where some adjustments were made, for example, to Article 10 in terms of the role of the prosecutor service, the confidentiality of information. I think being that it was done probably a year after, maybe those that were there around that time would know. But there were some changes to also improve the screening process, and we have this on a national ordinance level, where, as you know, the not having conflicting businesses, submitting your tax papers, the reports to the prosecutor office. So what I'm saying is we have a national ordinance, and we no longer necessarily need to follow what the Kingdom Decree says, because what I'm reading, it says it has expired. So my encouragement is to the government is to come to a decision as a country, which one we feel is best, rather than just following what the decree at the time was done. This decree was done 2 months after the previous election that year in 2014. I think some of us here know what might have been behind that. The use of instructions like this has since been questioned in IPCO by many scholars and so on. So I don't think this was the type of measure where the Dutch government should get involved in deciding how we should go about the selection of our ministers. I think it's time for the government of St. Martin to take its own decision, make its own national decree, and create its own structure for the meaning of the screening of ministers going forward. So that's what I wanted to add as those 2 points. MP Wescot-Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just briefly, your comments brought a question to mind, not regarding the issue that you spoke about, but rather for the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, we spoke about Article 50 of the Constitution, and you indicated, and we look forward to receiving that, explanation of the articles that I mentioned, because that's the way they are in Article 50. But what I also would ask you in the context of the legal advising that you're going to be receiving to look at is there is nowhere that the process for Article 50, so that is about suspension and or dismissal of members of Parliament, there is nowhere in the Constitution that it is explained how that process is to take place. So I would just like to give you that along. If this article is going to come up for discussion, that also be taken along. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, members of Parliament. Prime Minister, you've gotten a couple more questions.
Chairman, yes, in looking over the notes made from the, let's call it this second round, I must concur with MP Wescott that it would have been an interesting discussion if we had agreed from the beginning to have a discussion and go back and forth. Next time, I guess. The statements made about within the discussions with the main voting bureau, currently there is signage that is put up in the polling station that no phones are allowed, et cetera, et cetera. So those are rules or regulations that we have established that remains there. Understanding that it is not, doesn't have the underlying legislation. So we're looking at how and if that can be further enforced. Now that, let's say, hopefully the LBHAM will be enacted in time to be used this election with the visibility that is then there, that people would, let's say, refrain from doing those things, seeing that this was one of the ways in which the quote-unquote vote buying has taken place, or the suspicion of vote buying has taken place. There was a discussion as to people saying, but I am proud to vote, and people in the Netherlands were kept gestemd, you know, taking a selfie with their voted ballot. But I think you can do it with the closed ballot. You can, I think it is specific, no, to avoid the whole proof of I have voted for you to receive some sort of payment. I think you may want a memory of your first vote, if it is that, or maybe your vote period for you, and that's not a problem. But I think more than one person who may have relied on this method realized that they definitely paid for more than they got. So I don't know if it's considered a thing anymore, but definitely to avoid the situation, we'll have further discussions with the main voting bureau once we've received their advice on the dates. No, I did not get back the feedback as yet, and I do see that there are statements being made in the public. The reason I have not divulged the dates that have been devised as the feasible dates thus far is due to the fact that I do not want to make a statement and then get feedback afterwards that, unfortunately, no, not this. We have had times in the past where dates have been announced and changed, especially when a snap election situation. We do have time, and therefore I'm asking for the time. The main voting bureau chair was off island, and they are busy deliberating on this as we speak to ensure that that is done. As you mentioned with the signing of the ballot, that's the coding that we currently use. We will see what else is possible in the short term, but indeed more vigilance on that will be done. The info sessions, the date for that SEC for how to vote, etc., those dates have not yet been set. So once we have finalized the actual postulation and all the other dates, then we will make those announcements. Especially after the discussion today and the most interesting one I had with the organization in planning for the consultations with the public, we'll be able to determine prior areas in terms of short and long term, especially to see what is still possible for this election, and ensure that in the info sessions that people know, hey, we are discussing these things, but they are more for the long term. Certain things are constitution-based changes that will take a longer time, and will definitely legislative changes that are based on the ordinances will take a longer time. So anything we can do with ministerial regulations or national decrees and or national decrees with special measures, those things can be done in a shorter period of time with the cooperation of all concerned. So we will let you know as soon as we've been able to determine what else can be done based on the concerns. But for me, as Minister of General Affairs, anything that we can do to minimize the opportunity for corrupt practices to continue is what is a priority for me, whether it's in the long or the short or the medium term, and that we bring more awareness to the people in terms of your responsibility for proper governance, and that when you do those things, you give up your right to have complaints after because you are then part of the problem. We had a discussion with corporate governance just recently, and it remains a people problem. So we have to develop the strength of character, the morals and values to reap what we sow. If we're going to plant something, that is what will grow. So let us plant correct, do what is right, and model the correct behavior for those coming up, because we cannot speak one way and act another and don't think that the young people aren't watching. The last time we met, the decision has been made to send the technical staff to have further discussions with members of parliament. And the report that I got back was that they didn't actually receive anything from parliament that we could say, hey, this is where you are, this is where we are, you do this part, we do this part. So I think that still then is an opportunity. I am not aware of what you have compiled as a terms of reference. Was this shared with government? That we could, the terms of reference was shared with government? No. But I would like to know whether it's possible that it is shared so that we can see what can be done collaboratively. That's why I'm asking that, you know, further discussion be held on these topics, and we can have further closed-door discussions, working meetings to deliberate on these things as Parliament prefers. Member of Parliament Bryson mentioned the cost of campaigning vis-a-vis inflation and whatnot. But again, if I see what the French side have to campaign with, I think we are still pretty blessed. And at the end of the day, there are more donors available to spread around. So I say make the best of it. I don't think that that one can change in the short term for sure. It does require a lot of vigilance on everybody's side, and I think one member mentioned if we want to have a party system, then, and I have had instances in the past where the donor said, I will donate to the party, so that the party can spread it out among the different candidates and therefore have a more equal representation and opportunity for all. Secondly, I would like to address something because we've had this discussion, but I will have to have further discussions with whether it's BTP or whomever. Radio stations, I believe, are public forums. You have the situation where you have a community billboard, and I think I did experience it with 1 or 2 stations where they made a time slot available and they rotated, giving all parties the opportunity free of charge. I think if we're gonna say that we want to give an even playing field, then it shouldn't be that to get on this radio station is 500 an hour, that one is 300 an hour, that one is 200 a half an hour. And suddenly the same time that costs X doesn't cost X. So to me, that's a bit of extortionary behavior, if I may say so myself. I've been in the radio business, so the price didn't go up for the airtime, so why does it go up during election time? I don't know if the regulatory bodies can mandate it, that Friendside does it, so I don't know if there's some legislation that can be passed that would cap, not necessarily cap, but at least allow for equal representation by all parties on at least an hour a day or whatever is determined. And if others want to buy ads outside of that, fine, but that people can hear the voices of all concerned. Just that, that's my personal opinion, by the way. It was not debated with legal affairs or anyone, but this is something that I've been thinking about, especially seeing, I mean, I just would make the personal choice not to go there, but who can afford to, and yes, exposure is everything, will do what they need to do. So it's something that I think we should look at. I don't know if I would have the support of Parliament for that. This isn't about opposition, this is about Parliament, representation of the people. And MP Wescot-Williams, you mentioned with Article 50 that the process for certain things, I know there are several things within our legislation that is stated and it has to be worked out further somewhere that hasn't been, and so as a growing country, we continue to discover these. This has been noted, and I will liaise with legal affairs how best to address this actual challenge of not having the process defined in the how this is dealt with. And I might want to add that even in protecting the party structure, I believe Parliament can play a role in that as well, as it, you know, faction is a party. So maybe within that, how can be further defined within the rules of order of Parliament and or whatever other legislation can be used. So maybe we can ask the legal minds in Parliament to have a look at how to protect the party despite the actions of individual members of Parliament. So with that being said, I hope I have touched on all. You have another comment? Okay. Let me don't close mine then.
No, you missed, I don't know if you wanted to just briefly comment on it regarding the screening.
Yes, I did miss that one. The screening process that we're using is not based on a kingdom law. It is based on our laws. It is based on our decrees, decisions that were made by our government. What is possible though, yes, is to put a SEC screening law in place, and that has been discussed, I must say, and there is interest to do that. Again, hopefully we can prioritize that. So there are several legislation related to elections that need work. I am not proud of the fact that something that was a challenge since 2020 when I came in I was under the assumption it had been handled. It didn't get handled as I'd expected, and then we got caught up with legislation needed for COVID, for this, for that, for the other, not having enough persons. It is not excuses. It is the facts and the reality of what we're dealing with. And so now that we're getting some legislative assistance, hopefully we can finish the ones that are needed urgently in time for this next election. And we'll continue to do that. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and we will continue to do our best with the oars that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Members of Parliament, I see no others to speak at this time. So with that, I thank once again the Prime Minister and those following this meeting. And I hereby close this meeting. Thank you all for your attention, and see you tomorrow.